All right. I think I have enough time. I want to talk about the Phoenicians right now, and then eventually the Egyptians. But I want to talk about consequences. Now, who are the Canaanites? Who are the Phoenicians? I think there's a group of people, scholars, um, who would argue that there's no such thing as Phoenicians or Canaanites, that these are East Semitic peoples, right? You have East Semitic, West Semitic, North and South. But I would disagree. I would disagree. I would group the East, uh, the East Semitics as a tribe. Um, and what I think is going on is that I mean it. You basically look at Greece. I mean, does anybody argue that there's no such thing as the Greeks, right? But no, it's like in Greece at one point in time you had city states, right? Um, and this is what was happening in Phoenicia. So you have all these different city states with all these different political lines, And of course, as languages go, I mean, some of these East Semitic languages can change, but I think I mean, if you look at them, I don't know. I was about to say culturally, but this is technically a part of their religion, maybe. I don't know. But I read some of their religious stories, right? And it was pretty fascinating because the gods of the Phoenicians um, are basically a bunch of vapid, vain aristocrats, right? Um, and I use aristocrat in a very broad sense because, I mean, these were, I mean, you definitely, I think, had kings, but you had this class, upper class of Phoenicians, merchants and stuff, right? Some of the world's first factories come from Phoenicia, right? um, I mean, these are just legalized privileged leaders, right? Um, in a monarchy, they'd be aristocrats, legalized privileged leaders. Even in all republics until the United States Republic, all republics were actually run by the aristocrats. Republicanism was an overthrow of the king's power and um, delegating that power to uh, the lords. And then in a democracy, and then again, that's a legalized privilege, but even in a democracy, especially in a democracy, a lot of times the leaders dumb down the people, and it's like you have a bunch of dumb, ignorant people who are voting, and it turns into demagoguery. And the laws are very manipulative, right? But those who understand the laws are legally privileged, right? So I don't know the exact workings of the Phoenician elites, um, but they were, these Phoenician gods were just annoyingly uh, privileged uh, creatures, right? Very vain, very materialistic. I mean, if you think about the creation of cities, it's like there were times within human history where there were no cities, and so the leaders of a tribe don't have any walls to hide behind and bark like a chihuahua. Um, so the leaders would have to have uh, some martial abilities, but they'd also have to have some wisdom and foresight, right? Um, and maybe these were split. Maybe in the wandering tribe you've got the religious leaders who are handling the wisdom and foresight, and then you've got the martial folk. But I don't know how those societies worked either. Um, but I mean, for a wandering tribe that doesn't have any walls, there has to be some ability there within the tribe, within the leadership. Um, but walls get put up, and now you can have a situation like these Phoenicians. Um, where they're totally untried and untested. Um, I mean, they're in these Phoenician stories. They're very serious about these titles that they get. Lord, ooh, Lord. Um, and these titles are the foundation of their power, right? So in other words, you would definitely have a Phoenician underclass, right? But if you look at uh, the land is not a land that has the Nile, a land of abundant food. So these are going to be pretty much small, weak city-states, right? Compared to the powerhouses of Egypt, or Assyria, or the Hittites, or Babylon. Um, I mean, even if these Phoenicians had organized into a king and a kingdom, um, they'd still be uh, manpower and materially weak compared to the Egyptians. Um, and they don't have a whole lot, but they've got some prime real estate. If you're talking about trade routes, right? And so the one thing they do have is access to the sea, and so they become merchants, very successful merchants. Um, and many times they are conquered by the Egyptians. But it is my theory that at certain times within the Egyptian history, um, and I think this is how it was during the times of Moses. Because after Moses, Ramses goes out and he conquers this land again, and I think this is a conquering of the peoples who were controlling Egypt. But I do think that these Phoenicians, they got in with the Egyptians, and then through a secret society, they were able to take over Egypt. Without the Egyptians really knowing, right? Because it's done through corruption and deception and lies. And it's a slow process too, but it's also an organized process. That's why I say secret societies. Secret societies, come from Mesopotamia. And I'm not saying that the secret societies of today are um, the same. You guys can judge for yourself. Um, but in this context, that's what that happened. depending on your history, you can have different contexts and you can have different secret societies. But secret society, I mean, like you think about, like, think about this in terms of like maybe historical, political, um, even war strategy. Think about this in terms of story writing when you have a story that involves everything that I just said. There's this, like, you go to the history books, and what do you see? You see epic clashes between Egypt and the Hittites, and Egypt and Assyria. But the conquest of Canaan is kind of like a side note, right? And it would make sense that a people that is completely vulnerable toward the hordes of another people, that they would develop this form of warfare, right? Um, and I think you have to again divorce the morality of the Phoenicians, which I don't like, and I don't think Moses likes. Um, like when Moses refers to giants, he's talking about the aristocrats. You know, he's talking about these privileged hereditary dynastic families. Um, so, yeah, you know, I think you have to separate the morality from the tactics, because you could conceive of a smaller nation being conquered by a larger one, and that smaller nation doesn't like what's happening, so they conceive of deceit and lies in order as a form of warfare, um, and they're really just trying to free their people. So I'm just talking about the creation of deception and lies. It makes logical sense that this land that does not have a whole abundance of food or manpower or material gain, although the merchants have a lot of material gain, but the peasants probably aren't. Um, for a smaller nation to fight a larger one, right? And it's like, I think, I think the characterizations in history and the characterizations in fiction are false, and um, and there's consequences. There's consequences to victories, so-called victories sometimes, and what easy victories, to go up into these Phoenician lands, where a lot of times they won't even fight you. They'll just give you part of their gold to get you to shoo away, and no, I think history is a lot more interesting. Um, and our characterizations are very simplistic. The Hittites versus the Egyptians. But yeah, no, I definitely think that there was that this is how the Phoenicians fought, and Moses himself conquered Egypt, and he judged it and walked away. He cursed the bad Egyptians and blessed the good ones. Because that whole story of Exodus, it's a story of a coup. Um, this is all poetic talk, and the actual history is hidden within, I think. But I mean, he was acting a lot like his hero Abraham, who was going around. He'll go around to a city, curse the bad folk, bless the good folk, and then walk on to another one. Um, and and I think this is part of one continuous story where he's able to overthrow these Phoenicians within Egypt. Then he sneaks into Phoenicia through the back door, and I think he had his own secret society conspiracy. Because if you look at all of the Jews that went into the land of Egypt, none of them had been born in Egypt. So where are all these people? You know, and I think he sent them out into Canaan and Phoenicia, and they started to spy, um, and they started to say, hey, who's cool here and who's a douche. Um, because see, you know, I think the historical evidence, the archaeological evidence, shows that there were revolutions within many of these cities during the time I'm talking about. And I think those revolutions were done by Moses and his people. And so he had his own little secret society conspiracy. Um, to overthrow the Canaanites, but he didn't kill them all, right? He blessed the good ones and cursed the bad ones. I mean, that his purpose was never to destroy another tribe. Um, he like his hero Abraham would do good by another man's tribe.